Welcome back to the BCR Dawson sub. This update will cover work undertaken during May 2023, which saw the last sections of the original layout reinstalled and the first trains run. This month's update starts in the adjacent room with the new sections for Septimus. The various appliances for operations, including pick holders, throttle pockets, a magnetic strip for clipboards, and a beverage holder, were installed on the fascia. This photograph offers a close-up of the beverage holder, the uncoupling pick holder, and the south end control panel. The beverage holder is also useful for storing tools. I put a small plastic cup in there, and then I can put tools in there when they're needed near the layout. This view shows the throttle pockets and the magnetic toolbar for clipboards at the other end. The magnetic toolbar is really handy for the clipboards that the operators use. It saves them having to try and hang them on a hook. Over to Chetwynd now, where at the left end of the yard, I took a branch off the rear of the Lens LA152 panel for the new wireless throttle receiver. This branch was run underneath the layout to the rear and then up behind the upper deck benchwork. Those power supplies are for the LED layout lighting, and they are on a shelf underneath the layout. This run came up behind the upper deck and then back across the underside of the top lighting canopy above Dawson Creek. The run was then passed through the lighting canopy and into the Lens LTM101 receiver for the new wireless throttles. I have situated the receiver up high and on the side of the layout with the 2 yards where operations are most busy. So the day finally came for modifying and reinstalling the last sections of the original layout. Here we see the layout with those last sections awaiting reinstallation. The Cascatenol section had to be cut to fit across the new layout room, and this was done with a handsaw. After cutting, the left end wall with its existing passage holes was salvaged and reinstalled. The Cascatenol lighting canopy also had to be shortened, and again this was done with a handsaw. The Bond Sundance section had already been shortened, and it is seen here after reinstallation, thus completing the lower deck. The Cascatenol section was then reinstalled above, completing the upper deck. The rear edge of this section sits on top of the backdrop for the Bond Sundance section. The top lighting canopy was then reinstalled to complete the layout, and also its rear edge sits on top of the backdrop for the Cascatenol section. With the layout structurally complete once again, it was time to finish all of the electrical, lighting, and track connections. The track connections from Chetwynd to Sundance and Bond were installed and glued down. These sections were then wired into the track bus underneath. On the upper deck, the track section from Progress to Cascatenol was installed and wired in. The temporary span across the Cascatenol River was reinstalled and wired into the track bus. And at the other end of the bridge, the track connection from Cascatenol to Dawson Creek was also installed. And this was also wired into the track bus underneath. The track section which connects the helix to Tremblay got damaged at some point, and it had to be replaced. The track was lifted and the sub-road bed was sanded flat for the installation of new track bed. Here we see the new section of the track glued down and wired in. Another repair was required in Chetwynd Yard, where the end of a rail on one of the yard tracks got bent. I was able to straighten it somewhat and then fix it in place with CA adhesive. All of the track connections between benchwork sections were completed by sliding the half-length rail joiners across the joint. This system works quite well and it doesn't take very long to do. The command bus was reconnected between layout sections by inserting the cables back into the modular jacks at each joint in the benchwork. The auxiliary bus was reconnected at each benchwork joint by inserting the wires back into the terminal blocks. And the process was the same for the track bus wires. Labeling the wires proved to be very beneficial during this phase of layout recommissioning. The LED lighting runs were reconnected by inserting the plugs back into the jacks at each benchwork joint. This photograph illustrates all of the LED layout lighting after it's been reconnected and restored. This allowed me to remove the temporary work lights that I've been using during this time. The fast clocks were reinstalled and connected to their dedicated auxiliary bus. They are powered by a 6-volt power supply and they're mounted in the upper fascia. Here we see the 3 fast clocks above Dawson Creek, Cascadenot and Tremblay, and a 4th one's going to be added for the new section at Septimus in the other room. The top fascia is too shallow to accommodate a fast clock at Septimus, so a special housing for it was made and installed above the layout. And this photograph shows the new clock after installation. It still has to be wired up. Auxiliary power was turned on in the new room for the first time, and all the singlets and servos came back to life. A few minutes were spent verifying that all of them had power and were lighting up. The turnouts were tested one by one, and those not working properly were noted for diagnostic work and repair at a later date. Most of them were operating fine after the long hiatus, but there are some that require attention. Some of those are ones that I took out and reinstalled, and they need to be reprogrammed, and then they should work fine. The curtains beneath the lower deck were brought out of storage, and they were reinstalled along the benchwork for Chetwynd Yard. And the curtains along the north wall benchwork were also reinstalled. I'm going to have to extend the curtains to the far wall and then along the west wall. Originally this section was above a bed and a desk, and that's no longer the case, so I'm going to need to put some curtains along there. That'll also hide the blinds on the window that can be seen beneath the layout at that point. The structure mock-ups were brought out of storage and they were returned to the layout. This is the cargo, grain elevator, and annex at Dawson Creek. And this is the Alberta wheat pool elevator at Dawson Creek, and also the company trailer ramp. And here's the station and freight shed at Dawson Creek. And these are new mock-ups for the grain elevator and shed at Tremblay, which were built after the move. So this is their first time on the layout. Previously, I was using a Walthers co-op grain elevator and shed as a stand-in. These buildings are more accurate. They're also the correct color. A little video here on the turnouts. I've been going around the layout, recommissioning these. After the 2-year hiatus, most of them are working just fine. There are a few that I took off the layout and put back on, and they need to be reprogrammed. This is done by moving a small jumper on the singlet from run to a line, and the turnout then goes through an automatic endpoint calibration. So the turnout will go over to one side, and then it'll go over to the other side, and then it'll determine where the endpoints are. If that doesn't work, they can also be programmed manually using 2 buttons on the singlet. If that doesn't work, we can do a hard reset on the singlet and then do a reprogramming of the endpoints. So there are a few that have to be reprogrammed, and there's a few that have other issues that I'm going to have to work through, but the goal is to get all of these working really well before the first operating session. I should point out that the new singlets that are being sold now do not need to be programmed. They have 2 modes, a fast mode and a slow mode, and you simply choose the one that works best in the application. My singlets were all purchased prior to 2018, and they have the programming feature built into them. So we'll get these all working, and then we'll be ready to operate. My lens DCC system was brought out of storage and connected to a test loop on the dining room table. A portable ramp meter was used to verify that the track output voltage had not reset. The default setting of 16 volts is a little hot for the capacitors in my locomotives, so I run my system at 12 volts, and I needed to make sure that it was still set to 12 volts. This is engine 812, which went down to the US for repairs shortly before the pandemic, and then it got stranded there for a few years due to border restrictions. I was not able to go down and pick it up. This engine was used to test the system, and after nearly 2 years, it was great to see a locomotive's lights and hear the engine bell and horn again. After verifying that the system was working correctly, I updated the command station with the latest firmware. This comes from Lens on a USB stick that can be plugged into the rear of the unit. The update only takes a few seconds. This update actually came out just as I was taking the layout apart. And then shortly after dismantling the layout, I received my new Lens wireless throttles. Their system comprises the LH101R hand controller and the LTM101 receiver. It only took a few minutes to get these throttles up and running. They're identical in function to my existing LH101 tethered throttles, and these are a real joy to use. The command station and power supply were then moved to their home underneath the helix, and they were connected to the layout. And finally, the day had come to throw the switch and send power surging back into the rails. All the circuit breakers came on and lit up. My layout has 8 power districts. One of them is for the staging yard, which has yet to be built. One by one, the power districts were turned on for testing. The reset toggles allow each power district to be turned off if needed. This is useful if you're trying to trace a short or if you just need to shut a section down for some time. The portable ramp meter was used to verify track power in each district around the layout. This is particularly important for sections where the track bus had been altered or replaced, and I needed to make sure that it was working correctly. For each power district, a short circuit trip test was performed to verify that the circuit breakers were working as they should. They disable track power when a short circuit is detected, and they restore power when the short has been cleared. And when I place a quarter on the track, I should be seeing a red LED on my power management panel. The red light here indicates a short circuit during a trip test in Chetwynd Yard. On the wall not occupied by the layout, I hung the British Columbia coat of arms and a pair of location maps. The lower map shows the province of British Columbia with a box locating the area represented by the layout, and the upper map shows the modeled portion in detail. These maps will be useful for orienting operators who might be less familiar with the geography of our province. The maps were prepared by my friend Philippe. The door on which the maps are located leads to a walk-in closet. This will house the dispatcher's desk and a future south staging yard. And so after all that work, this is what the original layout now looks like in its new home, with lighting, curtains, and structures restored. And in the next room, the new sections for Septimus with all of their fascia fittings completed. This is the layout fully reinstalled in the new room. So let's take a walk around and see what we have. On this wall, we have Chetwynd Yard on the lower level and Dawson Creek on the upper level. The curtains have been installed below. Some of the control panels here have been revised for the new track arrangement. The structures have been returned to the layout. These are the new track connections into Bond and Sundance on the lower level. Of course, this whole section was extensively redone. And then Kiskatinaw Bridge on the upper level. We took about 20 inches out of here. And then this is the Highway 97 section. You can see the Fort St. John subdivision going around in behind. There's the access panels. And then on this wall, we have the Pine River Bridge section on the lower level. The bridge has yet to go back in. That's a future task. On the upper level, we have Tremblay. And then over here, we have the helix. And then on this wall, we have 2 maps. which show the location of the province of British Columbia and also the area modeled. These maps will be useful for orienting operators who might be less familiar with our province's geography. In this corner, we have approximately 2 feet between the end of Chetwynd and Dawson Creek and that wall. This will be a future expansion on both levels to get a little more space in those 2 yards. This door leads to a walk-in closet, and then a future expansion will be into the closet for staging a Northern Alberta Railways interchange on the top level, and I also hope to fit a dispatcher's desk in there. So that's the original layout in its new home. And now what we'll do is we'll go next door and we'll look at the new section for Septimus. This is the new benchwork for Septimus in the adjacent room. We've added throttle pockets, pick holders, mag strip for clipboards, a fast clock which is yet to be connected, a beverage holder which also can take a plastic cup full of tools. So this is 11 feet of new benchwork that's been added as a result of the move, and this will definitely add to operations. I'm still working on getting some of the servos here working, but almost all of them are now working, so we're making progress in that area. And at long last, it was time for a first run over the new Fort St. John subdivision. RS3s 570 and 567 are seen here at Chetwynd prior to departure for Septimus in the adjacent room. I used one of the new wireless throttles for the first run. The icon at left indicates the radio reception for the wireless throttle. The top line on the screen indicates the engine number and the speed setting, and the lower line indicates the function group and the functions which have been activated. The central knob is for speed control and for scrolling, and then you push it to change direction. Here the engines are seen motoring through an empty Chetwynd yard. And here they are passing through the new Bond siding. After passing through Bond, the engines entered the hidden trackage behind the Pine River section, and they then emerged through the wall into the adjacent room. The time spent negotiating the hidden trackage is just enough time to walk from one room to the next. And the 2 engines are seen here arriving at Septimus. They're the first to do so under DCC power. Well, after using and enjoying the 2 lens wireless throttles, I promptly ordered a third from the North American dealer, who is Accessory Pathways. They are based in Kingston, Ontario, and this unit arrived in just a few days. And on May 26, with several friends who've helped with the layout reinstallation invited over, we ran the first complete trains. Here, Work Extra 570 is seen departing Chetwynd with several gondolas of rail and ties. The train that is seen here passing through Bond, that's Work Caboose 1819 bringing up the rear. It has interior lighting and it has track inspection lights at either end, which are working very well. Here the train is entering Septimus after passing through the wall, and here it is upon arrival at Septimus. Engines 804 and 812 were then run over to Septimus to collect a ballast train which had been stationed there for initial testing under DC power. Here the train is returning south through Bond, and this was 812's first time on the layout in about probably 3 or 4 years. And here the train is coming around the curve to enter the yard at Chetwynd. The longer run to Septimus and the addition of Bond siding are notable gains as a result of the reconstruction. So it's been a very significant month for the layout with structural completion and the first trains run. There is still lots to do before regular operations can resume. The Pine River Bridge has to be reinstalled to enable operation over the Dawson Creek subdivision, and the servos for numerous turnouts require attention to get them working correctly. So there's a lot of fine-tuning to do yet. I would like to thank my friends Michael, Jim, Doug, John, and Philippe, who helped with various aspects of the work this month. Thank you for watching, and we'll be back with another update at some point. Until then, peace be with you.